Well, try this again.
So you leave your mind somewhere every now and then, too.
Every now and then I do. All right, everybody, we're going to be talking about the subject of the Antichrist tonight, continuing our end time study. And yes, my mind is parked in neutral many, many times, unfortunately. But there's a few times when I was at Hickory Street, I'd get up on Sunday morning and get up in the pulpit and realize I don't have my outline and say, y'all hold that thought, and I have to run back to the office and go get it. So I could usually preach most sermons without an outline. It's not a big deal. This one will be a little tougher because you're not just dealing with one text when you're walking through it and you've done your studies. So definitely got to have my bells and whistles here. But subject to the Antichrist, I imagine most of us have probably seen movies, Christian-oriented things. We've read a lot of things through the years, dating all the way back to the 70s with Hal Lindsey and Late Great Planet Earth, and that was one of the first big popular movements involving a study of the end times. And actually, I don't always disagree with Hal Lindsey. Some of the points I do, but for the most part, I think he was pretty solid in his research and his understanding. But I think he did set a lot of people's thinking in stone. I hear a lot of people who was around in that day who read a lot of Hal Lindsey, and you can tell by the way they respond, because one thing that Hal Lindsey did in his study of the end times was he would look at a given passage or something and he would try to put it in a concrete way as to how it might be fulfilled. And for example, there's a passage in Revelations that speaks of the 200 million, and he said, well, that's an army of red Chinese, because they're the only nation on earth that can field an army of 200 million. Well, I read that text, and I don't see that as an earthly army. I see it as a demonic force. I think it's a more literal interpretation of that. And that's an example where I might disagree with a popular author like Hal Lindsey or something like that. And then, of course, in a more modern context, we've got the Left Behind series. That's probably gotten a lot of the next generation of people, and it was accurate in many ways. There were some things that I necessarily didn't agree with. It was, of course, a fiction series, but they tried to put a lot of the prophecy in there and a lot of the biblical text in there, and I think in many ways it was a positive force. And those guys are pretty solid. I've got the Prophecy Study Bible. It was written by by the guy that authored that series, or was part of the author anyways. And it's a pretty good text. It's got a lot of good material in it. It's pretty conservative and pretty well written, but anytime you're dealing with prophecy and end-time studies and things like that, you're gonna have a lot of different opinions. And I think for the most part, evangelicals agree on the fundamentals. And when you start studying the Antichrist, other than the fact that I'm never going to try to say, oh, that's him, unless the Lord led me that direction, you do deal with people sometimes that they spend their life looking to try to put a name on that name. They try to attach a name to that. I've been asked by more people than I can imagine, is Barack Hussein Obama the Antichrist? And look, I can't tell you he isn't any more than I can tell you that, Brother Blob over here is not. But the reality is we don't know who he is, but the Scripture does reveal, and we'll talk about in a minute, that he's going to be revealed. That he will come upon the scene. And I believe that coming on the scene, not a coming into power, but a coming on the scene, is going to happen prior to the rapture. We will see the Antichrist, and we will become possibly even suspicious. We'll see someone who fits the criteria, who fits the potential, who fits everything that we're going to talk about tonight. And we're going to be able to, I think, as believers, to realize that perhaps this person we see coming on the scene is going to be the Antichrist. Now, whoever it turns out to be, and I don't begin to say that it is or isn't Obama. I may disagree with his policies, but I'm not going to put a label on him like that just because I don't like his policies. If that's the case, I would say Clinton was the Antichrist, but that's just me. Anyways, no, I couldn't resist that. But what does it mean when we talk about the Antichrist? What does it mean to be the Antichrist? You might know. What's anti mean?
Against.
Against. I'll say another interpretation of the word. Both those are correct. Against or instead of. A replacement, a counterfeit. It's not the real deal. It's an imitation. It's kind of like somebody said the other day, when you ask for a Dr. Pepper and they give you a Dr. Thunder. Sorry, it's not the real deal. Dr. Thunder tastes like cough syrup. Dr. Pepper is good. It's kind of like Mountain Lightning at Sam's Cola compared to Mountain Dew. Yeah, the twang is the same, but it's not the real deal. Well, the Antichrist is not so much an imitation Christ, though that's probably another way you can interpret that. He comes as a replacement for, as someone who wants to take the place of, not just as an alternative. The Scripture speaks of that there many will come saying, well, here's the Christ. And there's going to be many people that will present themselves in a Messiah complex, in a Messiah sort of way. But the Antichrist is different. He doesn't come to just be another one. He doesn't come to just stand alongside. He comes to replace. He comes to be an alternative to. Someone you can take instead of the true Christ. And And that's actually what the word anti means in the context that we're talking about. The first text we're going to look at tonight is Matthew 24. And y'all, we look at that, and I just want to go through that really quickly because I don't want to spend too much time. I think we took 3 weeks getting through the rapture, and that was not my plan. But we'll blame Rachel's story for that and just kind of move on. But anyways, no, I'm teasing. Matthew 24:5, we had a lot of good discussion, and we chased a few rabbits along the way, but that's good stuff. That means we're learning something. So I want to talk about the fact that why do we study to understand the Antichrist? I've had people tell me before when I've done a study on Satan or the Antichrist or something like that, we shouldn't be studying him. I don't know if we should be studying him. Well, I think anything in the Bible, the Scripture says that we should teach and preach the whole counsel of God. And if God took the time to teach us something about the subject, we ought to take the time to study it. And one of the reasons I think it's important to understand the Antichrist, and I gave 3 reasons in your outline tonight. The first is the fact that his time is drawing near, rapidly near. His being revealed to us is a prerequisite. It has to take place before the rapture. And his coming is the last sign we're given to look for. It's the last sign. His coming upon the scene is the last thing we're to look for. It's kind of like if Miss Rachel said on Facebook earlier, she said that she was really not good at driving at night. And she made a comment a little while later about how Texarkana's growing so much, the streets are changing. Well, if I were to give her directions to someplace tonight, what's the most important direction that she needs? That last one. That last thing, because you can get all the way there, but if you miss the last sign, if you miss that last signal that tells you you're at your destination, it didn't do you any good to take the journey, did it? Well, that's an example that we're given here with the Antichrist. So let's remind ourselves of what the Scripture gives us in Matthew 24, beginning in verse 5, of what he says is going to take place prior to the rapture of the church, and we'll see here in a moment as it links towards the Antichrist. It says, "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes," ring a bell, "in diverse places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and they shall kill you. And ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And there shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold." You're given a series of things that are going to be indicators that we're drawing near to the end of the time. First, of course, we're given this, the false Christ. The fact that as we draw near, more and more people will take on some sort of a Messiah-type role, a Messiah-type presentation of themselves. The wars and rumors of wars, the amount of conflict is going to grow worse and worse. We talked a couple of weeks ago about the fact that it uses a term that spoke of labor, of the toil, the travail of a woman, and it speaks of that in that sense. And I think the reason it does that is because as a woman is delivering and giving birth, the intensity increases. Both the frequency of the contractions and the intensity of the contractions increase. That's a normal way that the child comes into this world. And he uses that to describe all of these events. That these things are going to get worse and worse. And so as you start talking about those details, remember, that's the indicator. Not just that they happen. Because I get really annoyed at a lot of preachers and a lot of people who really have made their money off of this sort of thing. Every time there's an earthquake, they try to say, oh, that's proof that the end times are coming. Well, there's always been earthquakes. There's always been volcanoes. There's always been famines. There's always been hurricanes. There's always been disease. But what you've got to look for is whether the sign of their increasing is being fulfilled. And we've talked about a couple of weeks ago the fact that in the last 100 years, there's been a tenfold increase in the amount of earthquakes and the intensity of those earthquakes. That's an indication to me. So when you look at what happened a couple of days ago in Haiti, and not just the fact that they had an earthquake, that's bad enough, but the intensity of that earthquake, the destructive effect of that earthquake. I won't take that as an isolated case and say, oh, this earthquake is a proof that the Antichrist is near, or the proof that the rapture is near. It's not. But when you take that earthquake in the context of all the other earthquakes that we're having, and the amount of them, and the frequency of them, and intensity of them, and then you start combining it with the wars and the pestilences and all of these things, that is a sign that the